This is what nearly 7 years of war in Syria looks like. Hospitals, schools and homes reduced to rubble. The cost of rebuilding seems unimaginable. Estimates range from $100 billion to $350 billion, with some running even as high as $1 trillion. The UN says the hardest hit areas have been residential, followed by industrial, electrical and water, and finally agricultural. The question now is, where will all these funds come from? A top Russian diplomat says the EU should launch reconstruction efforts in Syria within months. Vladimir Chizhov, Russia's representative to the EU, said European states would bear the responsibility if they failed to recognise that it was high time to back a programme likely to cost dozens of billions of euros. The EU says its members are already by far the largest donors of Syrian relief. They say they've so far allocated more than $13 billion in humanitarian and development assistance. But as discussions of rebuilding continue, Syrian regime and Russian airstrikes are still taking place.
We are building, and we will rebuild again and again, whether the regime and its allies are pleased or not. We are staying here despite the bombings.
How much the EU will contribute to fund Syrian reconstruction, or whether at all, is slated to be decided at a conference on Syria in Brussels later this year. The cost of rebuilding Syria might be high, but the emotional toll of this war is incalculable. Sara Firth, TRT World, Syria.
TRT World's editor-at-large Ahmed Burai joins us now live from Hatay, near Turkey's border with Syria. Ahmed, welcome to the show. Look, even at 300 billion, let's call it an average estimate there of how much it might cost to rebuild Syria, is a huge amount. It's about 5 times what the US spent on rebuilding Iraq after the war there. So who is actually likely to pay this? Is it Russia? Is it Iran? Is it China, perhaps?
Well, according to the UN, at the very early stages, it said it's going to need like at least 30 years to repair what has been destroyed in Syria since the beginning of this war in 2011, and it will take longer to get Syria back on track. Now, this amount of 300 billion, more or less, is going to be paid by somebody, but the problem is there is a minimal appetite in the US to do any reconstruction, especially after Rex Tillerson spoke about their intention of no business into reconstruction, mainly after the scandals in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Now, on the other hand, Russia, Iran and China are the main allies for the Syrian regime, and they may pick up the tab in Syria and start the reconstruction. Now, Iran has been awarded, mining for phosphate in Palmyra next to or very close to Damascus. But the Iranians are there and they're competing on more resources on the ground. Now, Syria doesn't have that much of resources for these kind of international investors to be more involved and heavily involved. So I think it's basically going to be Iran, basically not because of the return on investment is going to be in terms of capital, but also in terms of more influence, political influence on the ground.
Now, China also has sounded pretty keen to jump in on some of these contracts that might come up as the reconstruction gets underway. What's in it for China?
For China, you know that Syria, it has supported Syria in the UN many times since 2000, when it also sent military personnel and also aid for the Syrian regime. On the other hand, for China, there's what's known as the Belt and Road Initiative, and that's the BRI, and that's one of the infrastructure development strategy covering mainly Asia and Europe, and Syria is part of that. And for China as well, it has a good history in terms of the reconstruction after civil wars. We all remember after the end of the civil war in Angola in 2002, China started projects over there. And I think that's why it is mainly interested in this geopolitical interest in the region.
Ahmed Burai, near the Turkish-Syria border in Hatay. Thank you very much indeed.